Tom's your fishing line ever get tangled up like this? Fortunately, I'm, as y'all know, real good at remedy with no trouble at all. I apologize for being late. Will has practice on Wednesdays, and I've told him for the last several weeks to get done at about 5:40, call me and I'll come pick him up. And it was 5:40, and I'm walking out the door, and he called and he said, come pick me up. So I had to hustle around and get stuff ready for him because I was not anticipating him calling. But I appreciate him calling. He could easily just walked on home and missed out tonight. But I appreciate him being here, Will, and thank you for that. We're going to continue with our journey to the Promised Land, and we'll be in Exodus chapters 19 and 20. That'll all be on the screen, but I would encourage you to be turning to there if you want to be able to refer back to it. And while you're turning there, I want to ask you a question tonight to start with, and it'll require you to think back to when you were young. I want you to think tonight, what was your mom or dad or grandparents' favorite commandment? Meaning, what rule did they repeat to you over and over again? If you heard her say it once, you heard it a million times, kind of a thing. Shell, always be good. All right. Had to make the bed. Thou shalt make the bed. That was one of them. Obey your parents. Now, that's what mom's always going to say, right? It says it in the Bible. You got to obey right there. Any other commandments at home? Wash your feet before you go to bed. Who you think that, of all the Rices, who was that directed to most directly, Lucille? Probably. Any others? Huh? Ask your daddy. All right. Sometimes followed up by ask your mom, which meant I don't know what the right answer is right there. So when we asked this, some of you all's faces kind of lit up just like that because you remembered exactly what it was. Now, if mom only said it one time, it might not have resonated, right? But when mom said it every night before you went to bed, it stuck. And that's been a long time ago, Lucille, and she pulled that up real quick, right? So commandments, as it were, here are things that we sort of know, right? We kind of know them by heart. Every time you go out and drive, you'll see on a main road, the speed limit sign is 55 miles an hour, right? You see that on 27 between here and Lancaster, and you see that, and it almost becomes sort of second nature to us. We know those. So we see something repeated over and over again, it sticks with us. Well, we followed those rules when mom told us that. We followed the driving rules, but now we've been driving for 40 years. We probably still follow those rules. How many of you still follow the rule mom and dad said 40 or 50 years ago? We probably all still, and when we mess up, we think about mom or dad. We talked about this in here before as well. Do what? Got shoes now. That changed things. This. Y'all don't realize this. There ain't many people in this building funnier than Linda Denham. If she doesn't say it out loud, she says it to Lucille, then Lucille says it out loud. Linda's the funny one. Y'all just don't always catch the stuff that she says right there. Exodus chapters 17, 18, and 19, we're kind of skipping over from last week. We can't spend all of our time in all these different things. But just as a just as a refresher on this, we're in this discussion of the Israelites' journey to Mount Sinai. And a couple of things. First, as they're going through, they complained about thirst. You may remember that story that Moses strikes the rock. Do you remember, was that what he was supposed to do? Was he supposed to get the water from the rock? But what was he supposed to do? Do you remember the story? He was supposed to speak to it. Why do you think he struck it? Anger and frustration. I kind of get it. They were complaining. They've complained the whole time here as it goes. Later, they engage in a conflict or a war, depends on how you read it, with the Amalekites. that's right there. Moses, who seems to be, if you read this, almost at his wits' end for most of the trip, gets counseled here by a man named Jethro, who was his father-in-law, and he provided a little bit of guidance in a leadership role. There's a lesson for us as well, that sometimes people who have, that Jethro would never let the people out of Israel, I don't mean that, but sometimes people who have been through some things can provide a little bit of guidance for us, so we're not striking the rocks near as much. Maybe we're doing it a little bit better. Finally, they get to Mount Sinai, and that's where we'll be tonight, and where God will descend in fire and smoke, and we're going to be talking about the 10 commandments that the Israelites will receive. Once again, I have skipped through the first slide. Looks great, right? All right, let's move on to where we are. We're in Exodus chapter 19, and we are going to read verses 10 through 15 as it is right now. Mel, do you care to read this? And we'll skip forward as another slide as well. So just a couple of quick things here that we see, because I don't really have questions for you on this set, but God has made this commandment for Israel to consecrate themselves. What does that word consecrate mean? Set aside. And methods, what were some examples of things that they should do to consecrate from our reading? I had 3, but there's probably a couple more as well. They were to wash their clothes. They were to they abstain, stay away, couldn't touch the mountain. What else? Don't come near your wife. They're preparing themselves for this situation. This is another example in the book of Exodus on this journey where there are very specific rules, right? There's seemingly not a single time in the book of Exodus where God says you got an hour of free time to run and play, right? Everything seems to be, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. But I think what we see here is that this preparation, they are preparing for something truly significant. What are they preparing to do right here? They're preparing to receive the word of God. How many of you dress different when you come to church than when you go out and run the weed eater? Why do we do that? We have this sort of thought about appropriateness. If I'm going to go out and run the weed eater, I'm not putting a tie on, all right? I'm not going to put a suit on. Carlos Ray is the only person I've ever known that went out and mowed fancy. Nobody else ever does that. But people, I'm not going to do that, right? Because I know I'm going to get nasty when I'm out there weed eating. But there are some things that we maybe dress up for. I told you all a few weeks ago, we had a Hall of Fame thing at the school. I texted my boss and I said, is this a golf shirt kind of thing or is this a suit and tie kind of thing? And he said, suit and tie. That's what I put on. Well, we have to prepare ourselves for the situation. And they are preparing themselves to meet God, to receive the word of God here, as it were. And so they had to be prepared for what they were about to see. All right, let's go a little bit further. Mary, I'm sorry. Probably, I think we can read significance into things sometimes, but it does mention a third day. The Moses story and the Jesus story reflect each other quite a bit. That's on that as well. Before we jump into the next set of verses, I wanted to show you a little description of the trip. This is not necessarily accurate. If you look for, if you ask 100 different people the route out of Egypt into the promised land, you'll get 100 different answers for what it was. It's sort of debatable as to where it would be, but it's a general rough following. This is Egypt right here, and then they would work their way down. This is Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, generally in this area that it's located, and then it would find its way up through here. You can't really see it. That's Gaza. So like Israel, Canaan land is sort of right there, just out of the range. But I wanted you to get a sense of the area in which they were going. And I say it's not necessarily because I pulled up 20 different maps and 20 of them look different. You can look in the back of your book and see this. A lot of it is because this is desert area. A lot of the things that are described on the trip don't necessarily jive perfectly because it's not necessarily there anymore. So it makes it a little bit difficult. In the background, if you can see this just a little bit, is Mount Sinai. Don't think of or interpret Mount Sinai as a singular mountain peak. There are very few mountain peaks that are all by themselves. They're usually in some kind of range. And so when we talk about the Rocky Mountains, we would kind of say the same as the Mount Sinai or the Sinai set of mountains right there. Just wanted you to see that just a bit as you go. This is a little small. I apologize for it right there. This is Exodus 19, 16 to 25. Ben, I'll let you read it since we're close. It's a little small.
Smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace. The whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain. And the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. The Lord said to Moses, go down and warn the people, lest they should break through and gaze at the Lord. And many of them perished. Also, that the priests who came near the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them. But Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up to the mountain Sinai, set bounds around the mountain and consecrate. The Lord said to him, away, get down and then come up to you and Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come upon the Lord, lest he break out against them. So Moses went down to the people and spoke.
Thank you, sir. Now, we see here in this series of verses, these 10 verses here, that God descends with thunder, with lightning, thick cloud, trumpet blast. Does that trigger anything in your mind? Huh? Walls of Jericho, not where I was going, but again, we're comparing Old and New Testament, so yeah, that's sort of how that's the same descriptions are often used for the end of time, if we want to say it that way. And so I think there's probably a reason for both. And so I want you to think about, I think the reason is the same for both, but I want you to think about why might God's appearance in the Old Testament, God's appearance in the New Testament when we see the transfiguration, and then God's appearance at the end of time, whenever that would be, why do you think they're A, all the same, and B, as sort of big deal as they are? Same God, okay? God doesn't change. And it's a big deal. And each one of these are specific sort of big deal issues there, as it were. And so just as I have, let's think about this as out here at church. All of you have a vehicle that you basically drive every time. But every now and then somebody gets a new vehicle. And when we walk out there or when you get here, what's the first thing you think of? Who's that? Wonder who that is. And then we go out and we see you get into it and we say, oh, I like that. That's really nice, or whatever it would be. Well, if God appears differently every time, what would that be? Hard right now. Be confusion, right? When we read in the Bible that God's not the author of confusion. And so I think it's a standard approach in each of these situations. I also think that it makes a point here that God's holiness is far bigger than anything that we can sort of grasp, right? How many of you know, let's just use a term we would say, quote unquote, good people? We all know good people, right? You know any good people that mess up? Of course, right? And so very few people are holy, and nobody's holy in the sense that God is, right? And so this approach is almost beyond recognition, perhaps, for us. And so Moses goes up and down as a sort of mediator between God and the people. Now, this is not a question that I had written down, but I want to ask it real quick. Is Moses a mediator between you and God today? No. Why is he not? Because Jesus was. Moses lived in what we would call the Mosaical period, and then there was we had the patriarchal period, right? We had these different periods, but Jesus serves as that mediator for us today. So why do you think, and we talked about this just a little bit, but why do you think God required them to prepare themselves? Okay. Uh-huh. No. Up. Yes. Uh-huh. Yep. What else? So I think our approach matters. If I've told this story before, I apologize, but we were laughing about it last week. But the guy that's the principal, they called him and they said, we need you to come to the courthouse. You may have to testify on some behalf. I don't remember what the deal was. And he said, okay. He said, do I need to do anything in particular? They said, no, you're probably not even going to get called up, but you just need to be there. Well, he said about 8 days into it, he said, I'm just sitting there. And he said, the attorney came up to him and he said, hey, you're going to go up and testify in 5 minutes. And he said he called his wife real quick and he said, I got to run over to Napier Brothers and get some pants, because he was sitting there in shorts. And the guy told him, he said, you can't wear that when you go up in front of the court. And so you realize we've got to be prepared for it. I think what Moses is doing here as this mediator is helping to help the people to prepare. Because if Moses had said, I'm going to go on up here, y'all just do whatever, what would have happened? He's pretty good at doing whatever, it seemed like. Of course, later on, they'll build a golden calf when they're gone for just a little while. So we see that quite a bit right there. So maybe we answered this already, but what does this teach us about approaching God in worship today? I'm going to put this question together with the second one. How do we sometimes forget the seriousness as well? Because I think you may want them together. Yeah. Uh-huh. Sure. Absolutely. Why else? Or what else? Maybe I shouldn't say why else. Sure.
And if you don't get your mind focused,
yep.
Get your heart prepared to receive God, you must worship Him in spirit and in truth. If you're not getting your spirit prepared, you're not going to be able to worship Him the way He needs to be worshipped.
Yep, absolutely. Uh-huh. Tom, no confusion. What? Any others? So I think that is more along the lines of preparing, making sure that your house is in order, so to speak. That you, yeah, I think that we would do that. Yeah. So do not to forsake. So yeah, you're right about being there, but we do have to prepare ourselves. Now let's look at the second one, or the third question. Do we sometimes struggle with that? Now I'm going to be real honest with you. If you're walking in here tonight and 5 minutes before they just called and said you've got cancer, it's hard to get your mind right, isn't it? And there's things that happens. I remember a few years ago at school, I got a phone call, something to do with Will between first and second period. And I did not teach a very good second period class. I wasn't focused on teaching. I was focused more on the issue, whatever it was with Will. That sometimes happens, right? And so how do we sort of fix that? Because we certainly have outside troubles that are with us. How do we resolve that? I don't know if that's the right word or not, but how do we make ourselves right. Pray. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
When we walk across the city of the cow and ask them how you doing, they say, you see that point on there? I focus on that. I can't look.
Right.
I can't look at the birds flying by
Mm-hmm.
or anything else. If I take my focus off that, he said, I will fall and I will die.
Yeah.
And that's what we got to do. We got to, no matter what else is going on, we
Yeah.
got to, at this point in time, my focus is here. I'm not going to look at this. I'm not going to think about this. My focus is here. I think the world is a general road. Not everybody. Go to church. The music is right. The preacher is right. We pointed out, and that's why it becomes in general. I think that I think all the people that in the world of gain what we got. I heard God say one time in my life, I wish we still sang the other king.
So when we think about our approach, it's same with anything that we have to prepare ourselves. I've told you this before, but after you taught for 22 years, I pretty much knew the questions the kids were going to ask before I even presented the information. But there are people that I work with that will fuss and fight every week about having to make a lesson plan. And as a school teacher, I wanted to prepare. I mean, yeah, we're going to talk about 10 commandments. I'm pretty familiar with the 10 commandments, but I want to have my notes here, my stuff to prepare myself as well. Well, you're not necessarily the school teacher. You may not be the preacher. And I don't know that you have to make a outline of notes when you come to church, but we do have to make sure that our mind is right. And I think that's something for us that we sometimes forget whenever we come to worship. Yeah. Right. In Exodus chapter 20, you're going to see the what we call the 10 commandments. We're splitting these in half. I actually preached about this not long ago, but we'll talk a little bit about it here as well. But the first handful, the first four, deal with our relationship with God, and that's what we're going to look at in Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 11. Will, can you read Exodus 21 through 11, sir? Thank you, sir. So when we look at the first four, in verse 3, no other gods. Verse 4 through 6, no idols. Verse 7, not to misuse his name. Numbers 8 through verse 8 through 11, to keep the Sabbath day holy. So these are all God, me and God kind of situations here. So this has nothing to do with me and you, but it's the relationship between the person and God. Again, Old Testament. But first question: how do these first four commandments give us a sort of understanding of who God is?
I think we don't fail to grasp his intensity. Not only his holiness and who he is, his power, but just the intensity of being in his presence. If you go to Mount Sinai now, and you look on there now, all these 1,000 years later, the tops of the mountain are still burned black from intense light and heat. From all the thousands of years ago, from God being on top of that. It is an intense presence, and he deserves the awe and complete total respect that we should be able to give.
Sure. Others? So if we're doing a ranking, God gets the number one ranking, no matter what. Now we may numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 may get rearranged every now and then when we're ranking things that are of importance to us, right? But number one would stay God at the top there. Any other thoughts on how it shapes our understanding of who God is? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Sure. So he's stepping into the next question, so we'll go ahead and say it. But we're not breaking new ground here. But in what subtle ways might we create gods or idols? The second one said you shouldn't do it, but in what it's talking about statues, and most of us are probably not doing that. But in what subtle ways do we create idols today without carving statues? Shelb just said one. In the time commitment that we sometimes commit to other things. What other ways? Bank money, yeah, sure. We put our trust. Others? Sure. Yep. Yep. Others? Our job. Yeah. Our job certainly is that as well. Matthew chapter 22, toward the end of the book of Matthew, Jesus summarized the law when he'd been asked was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, right? And how do these four commandments, which the people that Jesus was talking to would have been still living under, how did these commandments reflect that teaching of Jesus?
Love God with all your heart. And you're going to want him to do this. You're not going to take his name away because you love him and cherish him so dearly. You're not going to shoot and chase after him because you love him so much. Why else? What would you look at someone?
Right.
And all these things, if you're loving God from the heart, then all these things are going to be fulfilled naturally.
Right.
You're not even going to need them.
What others?
I think when you do that, everything else falls into place. I think your marriage falls into place, your work ethic falls into place, your understanding of life problems.
So when Jesus says that, he's talking in many ways about these four commandments that we see. But we've only covered four. There's six more that come after that. That's Exodus chapter 20, verses 12 through 17. And what we're going to see when we read these, this is the Old Testament, but what we're going to see is that what we read here, Jesus will actually broaden those in the New Testament as well. This is Exodus 20, 12 to 17. Tony, do you care to read this one? So if you look at these are not necessarily God related, but these are interactions between me and you, right? These are the way that we interact with one another. It says there to honor your father and mother. Everyone in here has a father and mother. And that doesn't mean that doesn't mean you're necessarily close to them, but we all have a father and mother. And so it says to honor. It says do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false testimony, do not covet. All of these things involve me and another person, right? They all involve me and another person. And so I want us to think about that. Why do you think God places family relationships and our relationships with other people at the heart of stability?
And you notice there in those commandments, nowhere in it doesn't say if there were. If they treat you.
Yes, there's no clause to it. Yeah.
That you will do it unconditionally, whether they earn it, whether they deserve it.
Yeah. What else? Go ahead. Yeah. Things are sort of jumbled. What else?
God creation is the people in his family. Jesus is described as our brother.
Sure.
We are described as children of God. The church is the bride of Christ. He is the husband of the bride. So
familial terms are used quite often. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm sure most of you have heard somebody maybe stand in front of the audience and say a prayer. It feels like this was said more when I was younger. Maybe I just noticed it more. But people would pray, and they would pray for there to be peace within the world. And so let's look at these 6 real quick and just say, let's imagine that all 6 of these things don't exist. Okay? Now, this is an exercise that's impractical, but imagine that these 6 things don't exist. When it says honor your father and mother, imagine that just automatically happens and everybody in the world does it. Didn't even have to write the rule. It doesn't exist because everybody does it. Let's just say that do not murder, that's never happened before. Nobody's ever been murdered. Nobody has ever committed adultery. Nobody has ever stolen. Nobody has ever lied or spoke falsely about another person to the court or to someone else. And no one has ever coveted anything that belonged to anyone else. Now, I know it's an exercise that's impractical, but just think about it. What issues would cease to exist if those 6 things themselves didn't exist? How many of you, I'm sorry. Yeah. How many of you would be happier tonight than you are if those 6 things didn't happen? How many of you wouldn't have to worry about going to court for anything ever again, right? Now, I realize that it's an impracticality. But even if something is impractical, do we look at it and say, well, I'll just not do it? No. Ben said a minute ago, there's no if tacked on to all those things. Now, is my neighbor going to be mean to me? Maybe. How do I treat my neighbor? I got to be, and if everybody, I can't make 8 billion people in the world do this. God didn't make them do this. He just put it out there. Can I make one person do this? Who? Myself. I can't do it for you. You can't do it for me. I can do it for myself, right? And so if I am stable, will that help provide stability for things around me? Yes. But if I'm unstable, what will the things that circle me almost inevitably have to be? It's going to be chaos as well. When thinking about this, the last one that's listed is coveting or covetousness. And I mentioned this in that sermon a few weeks ago when I talked about it, but I'm not sure that covet isn't the one that sparks the biggest problem of anything, right? What does it mean to covet? You desire, you want something, right? How does coveting break basically all the other commandments. Not being satisfied with what has been given to us. And so covetousness is often what it seems like it's sort of the baseline of what everything is often built upon. And it's our desire, unhappiness. We're not happy with what we've got, be it, well, let's just go through, be it our parental situation, be it somebody who's made us mad, someone that we've chosen to be married to, someone who has something that we would like, right? Someone who has a product that I want to go take from. It all seems to build off of covetousness. And so we have to get that. I feel like if we can get that in line, it'll help us with a lot of the other things as well. It's difficult, though. Now, we know about the 10 Commandments is carved in stone, right? Carve them out. Jesus, though, in Matthew chapter 5 and 6, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus will actually expand on these commandments. Now, it would have been hard to carve all of what Jesus said into stone, right? But how does Jesus change the commandments in just a broad sense?
Just the very basic, the least little thing that you can do.
Yep.
Jesus gives you the spirit and meaning that can't find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Others? Say it again. I'm sorry. Yes. Mm-hmm. The one, the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill, right? Well, it's easy to say, I have never done that. But have I ever thought about why I've never done that? Well, brother, have we done that? Well, maybe so. And so that introspection that Mary's talking about, why am I mad at Ben? Because sometimes I'm mad at something for no reason, right? This happens to me a lot. I'm mad about something, and then I think about it, I was like, why am I even mad about that? That was really dumb for me. And so that introspection, like Mary said, makes me think, okay, maybe I need to figure this out myself. I'm not going to be mad at this other person. And so she's right in that all of these sort of require us to think just a little bit. On Sunday morning, we're going to talk about curiosity. All right. We're going to talk about thinking deeper when it comes to the Bible. And I think a lot of times Christians, and I'm jumping ahead to Sunday, but I think a lot of times Christians have sort of been taught, have faith, but maybe don't think. And I think sometimes we look at things like this and we're like, oh, well, it says that I'm not doing that, so I'm fine. But I'm not even thinking about why I'm doing it. And we need to consider this. We need to think about why things are taught the way that they are. And I don't mean to get ahead of ourselves, so we'll talk about that on Sunday, but go ahead. Yeah.
That's a good rule.
Uh-huh. Sure. Firemen, but they break that rule every day. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Uh-huh. Sure. Yes. Yes. You're exactly right. Let's finish up. This is Exodus chapter 20, verses 18 through 21. The 10 Commandments have just been extended, have just been handed down. And so I want us to notice how the people have reacted to this. Leland, do you care to read this for me, sir? So, why were the people so afraid of God's presence? So we talked about that, and we see the reaction there, as it were. Now, I asked this question or something similar well, I think I changed the order here. I'm sorry, out of order from mine. How can the fear of God strengthen our faith rather than drive us away? Because quite often when we think about, I think about dogs. I have a fear of dogs. And if I go to your house and there's a dog, odds are I'm probably not wanting to come back around. And so a lot of times fear drives us away from things. So why is it, or how can we use the fear of God to actually bring us closer, not to push us away?
It's the same thing with your mom with that belt or your dad with that belt. You're going to, if you've got the fear and respect, that would make you won't go bad.
Yeah.
Not out of just love, but also I don't want to part of it.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Sure. Right. Sure. Sure. Yeah. So they walked us to this, which is good. But I think we sometimes focus on God's love maybe more than holiness or this description. But what balance should we maintain? If you're giving me a percentage balance, what should we maintain here between love and holiness?
Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom and understanding.
Okay.
You've got to have that understanding of who God is and that fear of His presence to begin to fathom this God, this all-powerful God who can create world, shape the world, love me enough that He comes to this earth and took human form and let these people beat Him and murder Him.
Mm-hmm.
When you put those together and create that balance,
Yeah.
see His love and His fear, then I think it makes you a lot better.
Yeah. Who else? What else? Okay. Yeah. I thought I'd ask a math question. I thought we'd get percentages thrown out at me right here. Mm-hmm. So I was asking because I knew somebody was going to say 50-50. I would argue that there's probably never a right answer to this question. Sometimes that love balance needs to be pretty heavy. Sometimes the holiness balance needs to be a little bit heavy. Depends on what the situation is. And I think we have to make our decisions based on those kind of situations. We see that on this journey, the holiness number was pretty heavy on God's side sometimes, right? But the love number showed up pretty high when they come across that Red Sea, right? We have to be careful with that. I have a friend of mine that I've known, so he's born 4 days younger than me. He's 4 days later than me. But he always said everything in moderation. And I think if we're not careful, we can be too much of anything. Shell's example right there, we can be too much love because sometimes the belt needs to come. But we can be too heavy and we don't show any kind of love toward anybody at all. We can do so many things. We do too much of everything. We can watch too much TV. We can watch too much news. We can watch too much, or we can be involved in too much anything. Balance that stuff. Because if we just pour one thing into our head over and over again, we can't be anything else. If God was all mean all the time, we'd have no hope. But if he was all love all the time, we'd have no respect. There has to be a balance there between us. And so I don't know if 50-50 is the right answer. Maybe the balance eventually finds its way there, but I think it's situational. And there's times, as Ecclesiastes said, there's times for some things and times for others. And we have to make sure that we balance the time and situation in the right way as well. I think God is doing that for the people of for the Israelites. I think sometimes the Israelites kind of struggled with that themselves, and we'll see that more as we go forward. Any comments or questions before we wrap up? So the 10 Commandments reveal God's holiness and his will for the people. We talked about them being carved in stone, right?